You would think that the FDA would take each of those ingredients and study them in human infants to make sure that each of those ingredients are safe. Well, they haven't done that. They've never taken vaccine quantities of each of those ingredients and done any sort of safety testing to confirm that each one of those ingredients are safe.
So if you're not doing that kind of detailed analysis, and it's not that expensive to do, you simply can't make any statement about the safety of these compounds in the nervous system. But it's one of the fundamental pillars of medicine that vaccines have saved millions of people around the world and therefore can't be questioned. And I think, in my view, everything in science can be questioned. I'm a neuroscientist by training, and my studies are in the origin of neurological disease. I develop animal models of Parkinson's and Lou Gehrig's disease. Recently, we've been looking at aluminum, which is common to many vaccines. It's used as an adjuvant. That means helper. Without the aluminum, the vaccine basically does not provide any long-term protection. And so my research has looked at injectable aluminum and how it might impact the nervous system. The difference between injectable aluminum versus dietary aluminum is that aluminum that you eat is excreted fairly rapidly. Injectable aluminum, however, is meant to stick around. And that's precisely why it's there in the first place. That's what an adjuvant does. So we simply did the really simple experiment of taking the same stuff out of the vaccines, the aluminum hydroxide, and injecting it into mice, into the muscles, to see what would happen if we tried to mimic the vaccine schedule. We were quite surprised to see how rapidly the behavioral symptoms emerged. They showed not only behavioral deficits of motor function, but they ultimately showed cognitive deficits as well. And once we sacrificed the animals and started looking inside their brains and spinal cords, we found massive damage to motor neurons. And so we may be creating the conditions for Parkinson's disease, Lou Gehrig's disease, Alzheimer's disease. Maybe not immediately, but maybe 20, 30, 40 years down the road. We had some concerns when we released the study that it might trigger a bit of a backlash. It actually triggered a lot of silence. Pharma and the regulatory agencies largely ignored it, which is a very safe position to take, because if they wanted to counter what I've said with my studies, they should have just reached into their file folder and come up with their own study and said, Dr. Shaw is simply wrong because we did this study and look what we found. And after, 4 years, they haven't done that.
All right, Dr. Ray, help us out first of all. This is the worst year for the flu in America since 1918. And we're trying to get the numbers of how many people have actually died from the flu. And now we see the CDC is not required by law anymore to count the deaths.
No, you can't. You can't trust the CDC anyway. They committed fraud back in 2004. They did a fraudulent study on vaccines, and this was exposed in the movie Vaxxed. I don't know whether the people, I'd recommend them watching two movies they can get online. One is Vaxxed, VAXXED, and the other one is called Injecting Aluminum. And these do an expose on what the CDC did back in, about 13, 14 years ago.
And what they keep quiet.
Yeah, and what they keep quiet, and how they do studies that really don't ask the right questions. They don't really prove anything.
Are they really putting mercury in these vaccinations?
Yeah, they're putting more than mercury in the vaccinations. I think I sent you that text, was the 7 disgusting things that they're putting in vaccines. And just to go over those again, the first one, which is probably the most disgusting, is aborted baby cells. Another one is blood from calf fetuses that is taken in a very gross way. Cells from army worms, cells from monkey kidneys, and these monkey kidney cells, actually, have been used in polio vaccines going way back many years, and they were contaminated with a thing called SV40 virus, which actually causes brain tumors in people down the line, and we've already seen this. Dog kidney cells, they're also used in flu vaccines, mouse brains, and chicken embryos. These are some of the disgusting things that are in the vaccines. But some of the more harmful things are thimerosal, which is mercury. That's supposedly put in there to keep the bacterial counts and so on down. Formaldehyde. I mean, formaldehyde, that's a embalming fluid. That's a horrible poison. And I think the worst of all is aluminum. And I'd like, if we have time, to give the people some cutting-edge information that's just come out within the last 2 months.
Go ahead.
On aluminum and vaccines.
Go ahead, doctor. Go ahead.
Okay, this business about aluminum in vaccines is very significant. And the British and the French have been doing most of the work on this in recent years, and they've come out with some really damning information. For example, they've done a lot of work using mice, but they've actually done autopsies on humans and dried the brains of autistic people who've died with autism, people who've died with Alzheimer's, and other conditions, like actually people who get kidney dialysis can get high aluminum in their brains. And what they found, basically, the baseline was, I think, 1 microgram per kilogram of brain, which is, the medium. There shouldn't be any aluminum in the brain, but there's aluminum in most brains nowadays because of so many things contaminated with it. And aluminum is not anything that should be in the body. It's not necessary for any enzyme systems or anything in the body, such as things like copper and zinc, which are. It's actually a toxin through and through. And so what they found one 15-year-old boy with autism had a level of 22.1 micrograms, which is 22 times the median and about 8 times the level that can produce toxicity. They found half that level in people with Alzheimer's disease, and levels similar to that in some of the kidney dialysis people. But it's the aluminum hydroxide, it's the aluminum hydroxide adjuvant that's in the vaccine, which actually, in the case of autism, it stimulates cytokines, which are substances that stimulate the immune system. Interleukin 6 is the specific one here. And what happens is that stuff is in certain vaccines, it's worse than others. Like tetanus is particularly bad. Some of the lower concentrations, you get high levels of aluminum in the brain. And it causes inflammation in the brain. They've tested all this with mice and so on. The aluminum causes high levels of inflammation in the brain, and this is what causes autism.
Isn't there, Doctor?
Yeah,
just one, Doctor. 1 second. I mean, isn't also the aluminum? Isn't that also in the chemtrails as well?
Exactly. This is the thing, they're injecting it. I mean, this is the scenario. We know that there's aluminum in deodorants, there's aluminum in antacids, and pots and pans, aluminum. And people have been advised not to use this. But I mean, here's the scenario. Some poor family, they're doing all of this, and then the mother, she gets these damning vaccines while she's pregnant, and then her poor little baby is born. And, this is how bad it is. There's 36 vaccines are now administered to children before the age of 5. That's quadruple what it was in the 80s when I was in public health. 36 vaccines.
Why?
By the age of 6 months, they have injected these little babies. Now, these aren't adults. These are 10-pound babies or whatever. By the time they're 6 months old, they've had 3,700 micrograms of aluminum injected into them. By the time they're 18 months old, it's 5,000 micrograms of aluminum. And then they're dumping it on us in the chemtrails. And the proof of that, actually, Shasta County in California has raised a ruckus about this. They've taken snow way up on Mount Shasta, high levels, 30,000 micrograms, whatever, of aluminum hydroxide in the snow. They've checked it in the snow. Now, that kind of aluminum doesn't occur naturally. It has to be made in a lab. And they're finding it up there. So we know they're pouring this stuff on us.
A couple years ago, Doctor, it snowed here in the Midwest. It snowed here in Indiana. And someone said, hey, the snow's not real. You could take a blowtorch to it and it wouldn't melt. I thought these guys have lost their mind. So I went out and got the snow, brought it in, took a blowtorch to it and it would not melt. Doctor, I'll tell you what it did, and I did it. I videoed it. Fox News put it on television. It didn't melt, doctor. Instead, it turned black and smelled like burning plastic. Was that the aluminum in it?
Sure. The chemtrail probably came down just at the same time as the snow and dumped this stuff right into the snow.
Exactly.
So it's it's disgusting.
And into the tree.
They did 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago, in a little town, Ontario, Espanola. People went to the trouble of scraping samples off of buildings and so on and having it examined. And there was aluminum and barium. They also organisms like mycoplasma, bacteria, viruses. They're dumping all blood plasma. They're dumping this stuff in the chemtrails as well.
It's all been proven.
Okay.
Hang on, doctor.
Okay.
Yeah, they hit us with some static. I think the
Static.
NSA is a little nervous, but that's all right. Keep on going, all right. But they hit us with some static. Keep on going. So back to the flu vaccine. You talked about monkey kidneys. They're using
dog kidneys.
Yeah,
Actually used in flu vaccine.
Why would you use embryos from a chicken for flu vaccine? Can you just give me the rationale to use all this stuff? Why? I mean, are they saying this is what makes the flu vaccine stronger?
Yeah, I would say Agenda 21, but supposedly this is to grow the virus and attenuate the virus. But this is there's too much. There's too much in there that's poison. There's no reason to be taking any vaccines at all.
It's really Agenda 21, isn't it? It's depopulation.
Yes, it is.
And, people think years ago, doctor, people thought, these guys are just conspiracy theorists. There's nothing to all this. But the eyes of the blind are opening now. There's just so much going on. It's proven that we are telling the truth, that there is an agenda to create a depopulation of the public, isn't there?
There is, and there's also judgment. God's judgment promises pestilence in the last days, and there's no way around it. We're not going to stop it. It's going to happen anyway. But we're also the Illuminati and so on. The evil people are helping it along.
Yeah, I agree with that. They're part of why it's being caused.